Well, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining me here today and excited to chat with you. And I want to start with your athletic career that led to the work that you're doing now with athletes and teams. So give us a little bit of background on your soccer career and how that kind of led you into the work that you're doing now.
Yeah, absolutely. Evan, thank you very much for having me on the show today. Really appreciate the opportunity to share a little bit of my story, as well as just talk shop a little bit. I was a three sport athlete throughout high school. I loved to compete, but I fell in love with soccer at an early age and just loved the game. Uh, as a result of that, I was able to get recruited and ended up playing at Ohio Wesleyan University. Had a really successful 4-year career there, and I also dipped my toe into the basketball space. So again, I was a three sport athlete. So for 1 year, Ohio Wesleyan actually played college basketball as well. So I was a point guard there for, like I said, really brief moments. I was basically the towel guy. I swung my towel around on the bench the entire time. That was about the extent of it. Other than that, but the soccer side of it, had a great career, very successful career. Learned a ton as about sport, but also about life, and really began to shape the coach. Really, Dr. Jay Martin, really invested in me athletically as a man. Really had a huge impact in my life, and really propelled me to what I'm doing now, working with professional athletes in the midst of helping them in their transition, as well as mentoring and coaching them.
Yeah, really neat. And so, talk to us a little bit about that because you do work with athletes that are about to transition out of their sport and maybe struggling a little bit. And did you have a similar struggle as you were coming out of your athletic career?
Yeah, so I'll take a little bit of a story backwards a little bit. When I was in sixth grade, I really began to realize how influential sport can be for other people. And if I was good at sport, then other people liked me. And I'm not sure about you, but I love when people like me. I want people to like me. I want to feel valued, significant, all those things. And sport was that vehicle for me. And so that was really a significant driving force. And a lot of who I am and who I was at that time was derived from sport. So if I felt valued and significant when I was successful. And so when I stopped playing, there was this sense of a void, because my whole life had been guaranteed and focused on this sport that I absolutely loved to play. And all of a sudden, the season ended my senior year, and they started looking at, can I go pro? And I was on that cusp of, I maybe could have went in the lower divisions, but the probability was still slim. And so I was like, and I didn't want to really have to grind it out. I got married that year. And so there's a lot of other factors into that. But there was a sense of loss, the sense of trying to figure out what do I do? Like, I have this sport that I've loved and played for basically since I was 5, and now it's no longer a part of my daily routine. And so that was really, for me, a significant moment of like I said, trying to figure out, what do I do with this? Like, how do I navigate this? And so being sort of relying on my history and what I've done before, I just sort of stuffed those things down and just said, hey, I'm just going to put my head down and I'm going to grind it out. I'm going to push harder, work harder, be active, and all that kind of stuff. And that was really the focus that I took on after graduation. And it wasn't really healthy, to be honest. But that's what I knew. That's what I had done before, whether injury or other moments in time of struggling. I just said, hey, I'm just going to just stuff it down and just keep going and work harder and train harder and whatever that even looked like. And so that was definitely a struggle in that transition for me.
Yeah. And where did this lead you? Like, did you go directly into working with teams, or did you have an organization that you were working for? Tell us about kind of like your first couple of roles after leaving your athletic career.
So I was introduced to an organization called Athletes in Action when I was in college. I participated within an organization as a student athlete. And then when I graduated, pro soccer was just getting started in the U.S. So Major League Soccer, I was in Ohio Wesleyan, just outside of Columbus. Major League Soccer started in '96, and so there was staff with Athletes in Action working with the pro team there, and we just started developing relationships, soccer circles. Just, every sport has a sort of their little niche, so we met each other, got to connect, developed a friendship. He said, "Hey, I'd love for you to consider joining Athletes in Action and working with athletes, integration of faith in sport, character development, leadership." And I was like, okay, sounds good. So basically I jumped into that organization at 23, went through an application process, did all that. And my first assignment was actually working at the Ohio State University. You can't say Ohio State, you gotta say the Ohio State University. with athletes there. So I worked with soccer players, some of the guys in the NFL, sorry, on the football team, which ended up going to the NFL. A lot of those guys did. I worked with fencing, men's gymnastics, men's volleyball, and then also wrestling, where the sort of the sports that I sort of work with, serving, mentoring, investing, coaching, life coaching, that kind of stuff, and leadership development and integration of faith into their sport, what that looked like. So that was sort of my first sort of gig out of college.
Very cool. And, talk about that for a brief second, because like you mentioned, the Ohio State University, really kind of one of the top programs across the board, regardless of sport. Talk about some of like maybe the best athletes or best teams that you had the ability to be around. What was it about either those athletes in terms of their traits that you noticed that stuck out to you, or maybe the teams in terms of the culture?
Yeah. Well, like I said, the irony is I'm actually from Michigan originally. And so going from Michigan, being a Wolverine fan my whole life, and then all of a sudden my first, full-time gig job being at Ohio State University was a bit, again, irony. But when I started working at Ohio State, Jim Tressel had just come in as the head coach. And so up until that point, it was Cooper, and Michigan was pounding on Ohio State for years. Like, they have an amazing team and Michigan would always beat them. But when Tressel came in, it was a significant shift. Just culturally, whether it was the focus, I don't know all the details. But one of the things that really was intentional, what I saw with Coach Tressel, was this holistic development of the athlete. It wasn't just about winning. There was an intentional aspect of developing character, leadership, and investment in the culture. And as a result of that, they won. So it was definitely a significant shift that I was able to observe as sort of on the sidelines and watching and work with some of the athletes, just the perspective of the athlete shifting in that regard. And then also to come to the other sports, I worked with a couple of guys that participated in the Olympics in wrestling. And there was a sense of family and love that within that wrestling community that was unheard of. I'm not a wrestler. I don't know the sport. I don't fully understand a lot of the sport, all that kind of stuff, but seeing how those teammates valued each other and honored each other in training, respect each other, but also even outside of the trainings as well. And that was something culturally for me. I was like, wow, that was just impressive. And you saw that transfer then to results, and obviously having a lot of success. A number of All-Americans that I worked with, and other guys that went through Olympic trials, a couple of guys playing the wrestling in the Olympics. And so you saw this tenacity and this sense of, like I said, culture, leadership, character that was emphasized and focused on. It wasn't just about the wins and losses, and the results took care of themselves.
Was there anything specific, because I think that is a really important piece. You talked about wrestling specifically. It's a sport where you are giving an incredible amount of time, and the practice is incredibly intense. And so I can understand where that bond is maybe formed with those teammates. Was there anything specific that either that team did, or you talked about Tressel kind of focusing in on the leadership development? Was it more just that it was being talked about and focused on, or was there actual programs, or were there actual kind of like team building exercises that were going on? What was it that you could tell was kind of like the new emphasis?
A lot of it was relationships. I remember John Maxwell many years ago heard him speak. He said that it's people want to basically know that you value them and appreciate them versus wanting something from them. And so when what I saw was the coaches as well as their teammates saying, "Hey, I'm here because I appreciate you, I care about you, I value you." And when you saw that on the field, as well as even like at the lunch hall or whatever, the food courts or wherever they were at, I can't remember what they're called. But it was a sense of just a value of relationship and value as a person, not just for what you could do for them on the field or on the wrestling mat. And so when that happened, there was just a camaraderie that was developed and cultivated that really created this, again, this focus, this intensity, but also this sense of respect and honor of each other, that they wanted to put the work in. It's like I said, the wrestling, the moments and trainings were intense. These guys were going at it. But it was a sense of, as soon as in those moments, they're saying, we're doing this because we want to get better individually, but knowing that as we get better individually, collectively, we're going to be that much better as well. And so there was just, again, sense of relationship that was really cultivated. That was really impressive for me. And having the coaching staff and support staff all moving in that direction of, hey, we want to build up relationships, connection with these athletes. knowing that their connection off the field or off the mat is also going to transfer onto the mat, which in turn will transfer to the results, the winning and the losses.
Yeah, I'm smiling because, as you're just describing this, I'm thinking about the best teams I was a part of.
Mhm.
And that was definitely a common theme. And I remember a coach that I coached with when I was very young. One of my first coaching jobs used to always say, the players don't care how much you know until they know how much you care.
Absolutely.
And he used to say it all the time, and it never quite registered with me as a 22, 23-year-old coach trying to learn
Yeah.
everything that was going on and being introduced to college football for the first time. But I think as I grew and evolved as a coach, that was maybe the most profound statement of my career. And, it, the relationships are what it's all about. I know that the Marines have done studies about the number one motivating factor for Marines individually, and it is overwhelmingly to come through for the person next to them. It is all about the relationships, and like you said, you're spending a lot of time. It takes a lot of dedication, whether you're going to be a Marine or a college wrestler or whatever, and that training, forming those bonds and those relationships are oftentimes the number one biggest motivating factor for anybody working in a high performance industry.
And what's interesting is that as athletes move on from playing, whether university or professional sport, you ask them, what's the one thing that you miss the most? It's 99% of the time. There's always an exception, but 99% of the time, it's the relationships. It's being in the locker room with your teammates. It's the banter. It's the road trips. It's feeling, but it's all surrounded around relationships and engaging in those spaces. And that's what they miss the most. It's not the grind. It's not the intense workouts. It's not the fame. It's the people.
100%. And one of the cool things about your work that you've done really now over the last almost 2 decades is, you were at Ohio State, and then I know that you've worked with a wide variety of athletes and teams since then. So if you can, just give us a quick overview of the last 20 years of mentoring athletes and working with high level teams.
Yeah. So I was at Ohio State for 4 years. And then, like I said, initially was introduced to athletes in action through the character coach and chaplain that was working with the Columbus Crew. And the game plan was to eventually go into working with pro soccer within that environment, that space. So did 4 years at Ohio State, and then made the transition to working with professional athletes. And initially it was mainly the second and third pro divisions in the US and Canada. And so my job was to network, identify, place, and train character coaches and chaplains for, at the time it was called the United Soccer Leagues, Division I and Division II, and now it's called the Championship and League One. But yeah, that was my job. And so just leveraging networks and developing relationships with current athletes, former athletes, coaches, GMs, front office staff. And then from there, identifying people within those different cities to work with the players. And so developed a significant network of working with, again, the athletes, coaching staff, GMs, as well as character coaches and chaplains to work within that space. And again, that was been now for almost 15 years. I've been working in that environment. And then in 2011, I was in Ohio for about 4 years after Ohio State. And then in 2011, moved down to North Carolina, to Raleigh, North Carolina. So I'm also the character coach and chaplain for North Carolina Football Club now. And I've been working with the club and the players for, it's my 9th season, 10th season. Lost count. Yeah. So 10th season. Wow, that's crazy. COVID sort of puts a little spin on things, right? Like the years sort of blur a little bit. So yeah, this is my 10th season with the club.
Yes, COVID has made a lot of things blur, that's for sure. But 10 years working for anybody in sports is obviously, speaks a lot about the type of work that you do. And I know that you work with both athletes and coaches. And I just want to start with athletes. And a lot of this is mentoring, and you're taking them through programs and obviously developing relationships with them. Talk to us a little bit about, what athletes struggle with the most that you've kind of had in your experience as a coach.
I think probably one of the biggest things is confidence. Like I said, there's always exceptions, but most athletes technically and tactically have a good sense of when you get that pro level, there's not a lot of differentiation. but it's understanding is how do you leverage and use what you've been given and your experiences to maximize performance. And so it's having that confidence. And so you get a player that one day he's playing unbelievable, and the next day, because of whether the coach is yelling at him or he made a couple of mistakes or just the life, like, so there's things happen off the field, girlfriend broke up with him, or there's maybe been a death in the family, or fill in the blank. There's a myriad of different things. Just the confidence begins to wane. And as a result of that, it affects commitment, it affects focus, it affects recovery, like sleep, it affects so many different things as a natural ripple effect. And so that's probably one of the biggest things, is helping athletes understand, okay, everything's connected. And like we say, hey, compartmentalize. You have your sport here, you have your nutrition here, have family over here. But the reality is that you can't. And as humans, everything sort of melds together. We might be able to have a little bit over here in different compartments, but the reality is there is going to be spillover. And so it's helping athletes understand that. Part of the reason why you may be struggling athletically right now is because your family is going through such a difficult time, or because of maybe you're just struggling with from the financial side of things. Maybe the contract isn't what you wanted, or you're in the middle of a contract negotiation that's just weighing on you, or maybe you're out of contract here in 3 months and you're not sure what the next step's going to be. Or there's just maybe tension and conflict with the team. You had a disagreement with the general manager or one of the coaches, or just there's so many other aspects that go into it. And it's helping athletes understand that there's so much of our lives are all interconnected. And then it's just working through those things. And then something else I started doing recently is actually helping athletes from a mental side of things, is working through their traumas from growing up. So as there's no one in the world that has not experienced trauma in some capacity. And so much of our brain development occurs in those early years. It sticks with you. And you can have a smell, you can have a taste, you can have a word, just something that triggers that trauma from our youth. So it's helping athletes understand what are those triggers, what are those traumas, and can we just discover healing in those moments, but also help just work through it, just talk about it. And a lot of times the athlete just needs to talk through some of those things to discover what's going on, what's happening, why am I feeling this way, and being able to develop what actually happened in that moment, find clarity there. And so I do that a lot of times with exercises, having people, have the athletes work on their story. And so I just focus, hey, let's write your story. Our stories have power. And the more we not only learn and remember our story, but also the more we share our story, the more influential, more that power grows. And so that's a practice I do with a lot of the guys. It's like, hey, share your story. And not only share with other people, your teammates, that kind of stuff, but also be curious and ask about the stories of others, your teammates, coaching staff, friends, other coworkers, whoever's in your network. Just be willing to ask their story and give others the opportunity to hear their story as well as share their story.
Yeah, you're hitting on some things that I'm very passionate about. Number one is taking genuine interest in other people. And you talked about relationships earlier. And I think this is maybe one of the things that's overlooked, especially in sports. And, there tends to be a lot of, selfishness, and that's a lot of how we, achieve high levels of success. But, now there's social media, and it's a very look at me, and taking those moments, like you said, to have that genuine interest in your teammates and in other people can be incredibly powerful. As I like to say, everybody's favorite topic is usually themselves. And so by asking about other people, it's a really great way to find those connection points. And something that I've heard you talk about in the past and have actually used in my own coaching is I've heard you talk about joy stories. And if it's appropriate, please share a little bit about that with us, because I thought I loved it when I heard you talk about it the first time.
So like this, the reality is that we have these different emotions, and they have like the big 6 negative emotions, but then also in addition to that, they have joy. And there's been a ton of research in the neuroscience space where the way our brain functions to be at its optimum level, or at its top level, is through the emotion of joy. And so one of the things I coach the guys with is like have these joy stories, these moments in their life that they just experience joy. So it could be walking on the beach with their family. It could be some sort of discovery. It could be a myriad of different things, but just something in their life that brought them joy. And it's almost like it's sort of sitting them in your back pocket. And when you begin to feel those negative emotions, you just take a step back, hit pause, stop, hit pause, and just take a couple deep breaths and picture that memory. And as you do that, that memory, joy is a choice. So you're able to experience that joy and through that memory, and allows your body to relax, allows your brain to recalibrate, to get to the way it's designed to work through that joy memory. And it's just, and again, I think the beauty of it is, and at first can be a little clunky, like a little awkward, like, okay, I'm taking a step back, close my eyes and do those things. But it's like, and it takes a little bit to remember that. But once you practice, let's like with anything, it can be really quick. So now it's like I take a step back, close my eyes, take a couple deep breaths over maybe 5, 6, 7 seconds. And then I have that memory, and I can picture that memory in an instant. And because it's really clear. And I remember the noise, the smells, like all the little things, the colors, it's all vibrant. And also joy, I can feel joy, actually physically feel my body changing, feel the relax. I can feel the calm. My heartbeat slows down. There's a serenity that takes place as a result of that joy memory. And that's again, it's a calming practice. And you can do this, and I've coached guys that do it in games. Like like obviously football, you have natural transitions. You have moments in basketball and baseball where there's natural transitions that can be 20 seconds or 60 seconds. And you can do it in those moments. So it's a practice that you actually can do, not just at home when you're, chilling by yourself, but actually you can do it in practices. You can do it in games and in trainings as well.
Yeah, it's great. And I'm going to be honest, like I use it as well. I remember after we talked the first time, we're all susceptible, especially, coming out of COVID. I mean, there's so much time, you're by yourself, and it's very easy. We're all susceptible to getting down on ourselves. And I think what I took away from when you first told me about it was, hey, I have accomplished some great things in the past. And, I'm going to use those same principles to do what's next on my journey. And maybe talk about that a little bit, because I know you're very passionate about athlete transition. And I think this is a very important thing when we're talking about anybody making the transition, even myself, from being a football coach to transitioning to the corporate world and being an executive coach. The tendency is to think like, well, how does football really relate to anything? But really, it relates to everything, right? Like all we're talking about is leading a group of people and helping them achieve their highest level of performance, whether it's a business or a doctor's office or a sports team. So talk about kind of like the work that you do now with the transition of athletes and with your shift course and framework.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it was interesting. In 2011, we moved to North Carolina, we had our third daughter. We moved multiple states away, and started a new job. And that was when really things for me personally in my story really, really were just reflected and just sort of blossomed. Not the right word, but like it was just a struggle, because it's like, oh my gosh, all this transition all happening all at once. And it was like, what do I do with this? And all these emotions and feelings and just trying to figure out what was going on sort of started bubbling to the surface. What was interesting was I was able to tie a lot of those the negative emotions and the insecurities that I was feeling actually when I stopped playing at Ohio Wesleyan University back when I was 22, 23 years old. So I began to just growing in self-awareness and maturing a little bit. I began to do a little bit of deep work and like, what's going on here? Why am I experiencing this? What's happening? I'm feeling some of the same things that a lot of the athletes that I'm working with that are getting ready to retire or were forced to retire because of injury or out of contract, couldn't find a contract. A lot of what they're describing, I'm actually feeling myself. What's happening here? And so that began a process for myself individually. It also began to explore and ask more questions of the athletes that I was working with and say, hey, what's going on here as this transition? As you get traded mid-season, like you go into the coach's office on Monday and the coach is like, you got a flight at 7 a.m. tomorrow and it's in San Diego and you're done. And it's like, oh my gosh, like you got to pack up your life and in an instant you're flying across the country for a brand new team and you got to be in the training field, 1,000 miles away with a completely new team, new locker room, new coaching staff. And it's like, what do you do with that? Like as an athlete, how do you navigate that space, that transition, that abruptness? And that was really began this journey of, well, how do I help athletes in this space? How do I encourage, how do I build into, but also not see it as a negative thing, but actually as an opportunity? Because there's opportunities in every moment, any moment, change, transition, there's opportunities there in those spaces, but you have to be looking for them. And that was one of the big things that as I was working through, is like, well, where are the opportunities here? And how can we frame it or have a perspective of opportunity versus fear, insecurity, frustration, lack of significance, or lack of value? Like, how do we see this as an opportunity for growth, for development, to continue to cultivate yourself as a person, as a human, as an athlete? And so that's where I just began to work on this framework. That's where Shift. So Shift is it's a 5-step framework to helping athletes navigate successful transition in sport and in life. And so again, whether it's going into the off season, whether it's being traded, retirement, whatever it may be, that's the Shift framework came out of that time of wrestling for myself, as well as then navigating with some athletes through that specific transition to life after playing professionally. And then I'm really excited this summer. Coming out here in the summer in 2021, have a book coming out. So it's called Shift, the Athlete's Playbook, 5 Proven Steps to Life After Sport. Super stoked about the book coming out. It's just a culmination of just getting a lot of my journey, my processing that I went through, and then also just sharing the stories of a lot of the athletes that I've worked with. But then also creating a space, a framework for helping athletes navigate transitions successfully. And as you said, Evan, too, like it's not just for athletes. Like it's coaches, it's support staff, and it's even guys like yourself going from where you were as a coach, then going into the corporate world. Any sort of transition, the framework, it fits.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. And we're going to dig into that here in a moment. And I want to hear, because as I'm like listening to you talk, you have a role currently with the teams that you work with where you are a coach, but you're not with them day to day, right? Like you're there obviously to support. You have your role. What role do the coaches play in all of this, right? Because I know you talked earlier about the Ohio State wrestling programs and the football programs and how they had emphasis on character and leadership development, and that's great. But at the end of the day, those coaches are paid to win. And yes, there can be a parallel or a connection between those types of developments, but nobody's going to say, well, let's keep Coach Burk here because, man, our GPA is just through the roof and we just have the greatest, most polite football team imaginable. That never is said. So talk a little bit about the coach's role in all of this. And if they don't play a role, or if it's more specified to someone in your type of specialty and role, just talk to us about the role that the actual sports coaches play in all of this.
That's a great question, because if you've been in the sporting athletic world in any capacity for any length of time, you're going to see across the spectrum, some coaches really focused on character leadership development, and then the other coach that goes, I could care less. I just want to win. And then everywhere in between. The spaces and the teams that I've worked with that have been successful on the field and off, I'm very integrated with the coach. So I want to use the same language. So as he's talking to the players about, courage or commitment or sacrifice, I want to make sure that I'm using the same language and vernacular to create that healthy culture that he's using. And so I'll meet with the coach. I said I'm around the team maybe once, twice a week in some various capacities. And I'm just there observing and being present, and just more, if guys want to talk and come hang out, come talk for a little bit, I'm able to do that. And other times it's scheduled one-on-one or maybe small group sessions where we're diving into a certain topic or a specific subject. Or there was a fight yesterday in practice. Like, we just need to just work through some of that tension and the conflict there interpersonally with myself, but also with the person I was going at it with. So it's just navigating that. But the teams that have been most successful in that is where I'm able to work in conjunction with the coaching staff. Because I want to reinforce what they're doing. Like that's the beauty of it, is that I want to be able to reinforce and empower the coaches in this space. And again, they're the head coach. They make the decisions. But it's also helping with the players to have a safe environment to be able to share, to be open, but also knowing that we're there to help them, not just athletically, but also holistically. So there's, again, in the places that have been more of a stonewall or more limited, has been where the coaches have been indifferent or just, hey, we're here to win. And that's just, and again, I'm as not the head coach, that's just sort of not a problem coach, that whatever you would like is what I'm available to do. And so that's sort of the perspective you take, and you do your best in those spaces, but knowing that there are just the reality that you're just limited. And so as a result of being limited, your influence and impact is also limited.
Yes. And I think, we're getting into kind of a realm, and obviously you're talking a lot about emotional and character development on teams, both with the coaching staff and the players. That alignment is incredibly important. Just like the alignment for anything, whether it's the process or the vision of where the team is going. And, you've talked in the past about, this is very similar to data coming into sports, maybe a decade, 15 years ago. kind of talk about the evolution that you're seeing in relation to data,
Yeah.
where that was before, and kind of almost like this new wave that we're entering into concerning the emotional and character development.
Yeah, it's interesting how, like I said, a decade, 15 years ago, it was the teams that had the money could afford the technology to track the data, to do all that thing. So that was like the cutting edge stuff. And so now it's like you can go to the youth soccer club that has 400 kids, and they have the heart rate monitors, they have the GPSs, they have all the things that needed for, how fat, what was their top speed, what's all the data that was before an edge or a value add is now pretty commonplace, just because of new technology, because the prices have been dropped. And so it's no longer as much of the data that's out there, because anyone can get it. And so what I've experienced and what I've been seeing is that, okay, what's the next level? What's the next edge that pro clubs, that academies, youth teams, AAUs, what are they looking for to find the edge to develop the athletes moving forward? And that's really been the character and leadership development. If I have an athlete that is team focused, understands the importance of sacrifice, but also understands the importance of self-care and is growing in that self-awareness, he's going to be in a healthier space emotionally than the athlete that's just crazy talented. Because you never know what he could go off the reins, he could do a lot of different things, she could do a lot, whatever it may be. So you're developing holistically these athletes that allow them to develop, again, just more of a holistic perspective. And when the athletes develop along that vein of emotional, psychologically, spiritually, intellectually, as well as athletically, they feed off of each other. So as you grow emotionally, it allows you to then push your body maybe a little bit further athletically. As you grow athletically, it gives you opportunity to be stretched, to put into situations that are more stressful, which allows then your emotions and your intellect, your spiritual growth to be able to happen and take place. So as each of those different avenues develop and grow, it creates opportunities, because of the transitions that you're experiencing, for the other areas to also grow and develop. And so you're almost internally pushing the envelope in various capacities for that maturation, for that development, for the growth as an individual, as a human, as well as an athlete. And that's really what's exciting. And so if you can catch that at 13, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, the growth trajectory is significantly higher versus the athlete that's catching at 18, 19, 20, 21, and they've relied just on their talent. I'm here a coach that an old coach, he's been, 45 plus years. And I was just chatting with him about like, what are you looking for? You're still recruiting, you're scouting. Like, what are you looking for in athletes? He goes, the reality is that by the time they're 17, their talent can only go that far. Like, talent gets you to about 17, 18. But after that, for those that are truly successful, it's all about character. It's all about leadership. Like, it's about the ability to manage your emotions, understanding the importance of team first, understanding the reality of self-awareness, what makes you tick, what are your strengths, not trying to do something that you're not really capable or able to do yet. Like, it's all these different things that go into that maturation process. So talent gets you 17, 18, but then beyond that, it's all about character and leadership. And that's what I'm looking for. So when I'm looking at the kid that is 15, 16, potentially going to be a recruit here soon, I'm looking at the character development side of things.
Yeah, this was huge for me when I was recruiting as a college coach, is that I was always more concerned about the character of the young men that I was recruiting to the football team. And I honestly didn't really care about the 40 times and the talent. Now, that's not a lot of coaches, but I had just seen it time and time again. And a lot of times, you're looking almost at, you kind of mentioned it too, you're looking at athletes that are almost identical in terms of their talent.
Yeah.
Maybe one does one thing better than the other, but by and large, if you're looking at the exact same thing, don't you want the better person that you have to show up to work with every day? To me, that just makes a lot of sense. And I know a lot of coaches, that's a hot topic, because they want the most talented person, or the person that's 6'4", whatever. But I've seen it time and time again, and I can totally attest that the character and the leadership totally dictates on-field performance.
And like, it's one of those things, when you get to that, I said, your top Division I, your top university programs, the pro level, like athletically, for the most part, everyone's almost on the same page. You always have your freak athletes that are just like, that can just jump onto the gym. Like, there's always those guys like that, that are just around. But the reality is that it's the players that have the discipline, that have the willingness to go that extra mile, the grit, the tenacity, the sacrifice. And it's really they're majority of the time they're not the most talented, but it's because of their character that allows them to excel, not only for a game or a season, but for multiple seasons on end. It's their character that allows them to continue to find that success. And so the reality is why not look for that, but also why not intentionally coach and cultivate that? Like that's the missing point. And that's part of why I've been brought into a lot of different places and with teams and coaches is that coaches go, I know the game, but I value character, value this stuff, but I'm not quite sure how to coach it or teach it to my athletes. So we need you to come in and actually help us in that space. And then again, you're working with the coaches to create the culture that they want to create, the healthy culture, the development culture, the character culture, but also what's running in parallel along with the results and the winning and desiring that as well.
Yeah, and naturally, when we're talking about acquiring talent at the professional level, or we're talking about recruiting, there is a baseline of talent. You can't just have the best character guys or girls. You have to have a combination. They have to have the talent. But talk about that because, in terms of developing the character, I guess maybe the way I look at it is like I'm looking for that character. So if you're 18 years old and I'm trying to recruit you to a college football team and you don't have that character, or maybe let's take it the other end of the spectrum where you just have maybe like negative character, I'm thinking like, I don't even want to mess with you. But you're kind of alluding to maybe the potential to develop that character. So maybe talk about the intersection of looking for the character and the development of that character once they're at a certain level.
It's good. Yeah, I think if you have the right mindset, anyone can learn anything. Like you can be taught. Like if you're willing to sacrifice, you're willing to learn, and you're coachable, it can be taught. But it's a choice. And so like we always have a choice, regardless of the environment and the situation we're in, you always have a choice. And so the question is, what will you choose? And a lot of our choices are dictated as a result of how we view ourselves, our identity. And so when you have a healthy sense of self, of answering that question, who am I? I may not be the most talented, may not be the most gifted, may not came from the right, whatever the right place is, whatever it may be, or whatever, all the things that people say are hurdles or obstacles in life that are just life. If I still choose to grow and learn and develop, I have that choice. And so as a result of that, understanding the sense of self and who I am, I'm able then to cultivate the choices and the character and leadership as a result of that. But it starts there. And again, I could have really poor character, but maybe I've had a moment where I've like realized, for me to grow and to succeed, something needs to change. I'm not sure what that is yet. And so it's stuff like that I'm looking for as a coach going, okay, is there a willingness to grow? Is there a willingness to acknowledge, hey, I have made mistakes, but I'm willing to try something new or try something different, or maybe go down a different path that I have from my past. And so that's where, for me, grace for me is significant. Second chances for me is significant. Just because you don't know, you just don't know. And if again, there's always guys and athletes that just make poor choice. That's a poor choice. That's a poor choice. And eventually there has to be some accountability and responsibility and ownership taken for those choices. But I'm a firm believer that we all make mistakes in some capacity, but if there's a willingness to learn and grow from them, then, hey, I'm all for it as a coach to help develop that athlete.
Yeah. And I just want to do a little thought experiment here real quick. So, you're coming into a team or you're going to work with an athlete, and I understand every situation is different and understanding what their needs are, but give us an example of kind of like how you would start developing that character, either in a team setting or with an individual. Like, where would you start?
Yeah, a lot of it started with something that most people already know or have an idea about, and that's intentional. Is the picture of the iceberg. Like that image has been out there for, I don't know, 20, 30, whatever years. But the reason why I start there is because most people have heard of it, but then I begin to describe it. The reality is what's below the surface that sinks the ship, if you will. Like what's below the surface that will basically be your detriment as an athlete, as a human. And so we want to start there. And so the question then you have to ask is, well, what's below the surface? when you look at your life and your choices and your decision making and your actions, and also your thoughts, your intentionality, but also your what drives you, what's below the surface? Is it going to sink the ship? Is it going to sink your life, or is it adding value to you? But also, I think this is one of the significant keys, and you hinted on this earlier, is that how's it going to add value to those around you? Because if what we're driven by is only internal, is it's about self, you are automatically capping yourself in what you can accomplish. So I truly believe that we have to have a drive and motivation that is beyond ourselves, that is outside of the individual. There has to be something outside of us in order for us to truly be who we are created to be and tap into that. So it starts with that self-awareness, but realizing that ultimately there's an outward focus, an outward drive to really for development, for success. And so I walk through, guys. That's where I start. Is the iceberg.
I love that. I kind of I gravitate towards mountains as kind of, my I guess the image that I use in a lot of my coaching. But I like the iceberg because there are so many unseen things. I mean, we're sitting here talking about character. You can't really see character, right? You have to have conversations with people. You have to have conversations with that person. You have to go back and check and test. And is what I'm hearing from other people aligning with what I'm seeing? And so I really like the iceberg analogy. And you mentioned a moment ago about like kind of like having that drive and motivation outside of ourselves. And I really love this because like the best team I was on was the SMU football team 2008, 2009. And they were coming out of the death penalty. They had never had a winning season in like 30 years. So these 18, 20-year-olds they didn't even know that SMU had ever had this history where they were, national contenders, Hall of Fame players on their team. And we never really talked about winning, as crazy as that sounds. We always talked about performing at our highest level and coming through for the guy next to us. And that always really stuck with me. And I know there's a lot of other great coaches that have done this as well. John Wooden is one that was notorious for never, ever talking about the other team, not even talking about winning once. It was always about the way that we play. And I just love kind of like how you said that right there in terms of, identifying the drive and motivation outside of ourselves.
Yeah. And I think the reality is that if it's is about self, it's not that you can't be successful. But what I'm postulating and saying is that it's you cap yourself. It's like, say you could be at a 10, but if it's only about you, the highest you can go is a 6 or a 7. But as soon as you open up the floodgates to someone beyond the person next to you, or maybe it's family, or maybe it's a cause, or being a part of a solution to a problem, as soon as you do that, that opens up the floodgates to influence and allow your influence and your impact and your success to exponentially grow. And that's what we want to do. That's what we want to have. And we want to leave this place. We want to influence the spaces that we're in a greater capacity than when we arrived. And so it has to be outside of ourselves.
Yeah. And you talk about impact and influence, and I just want to kind of start to close here and give you an opportunity to, again, revisit the book that you told us about earlier, and just kind of tell us kind of your motivation for wanting to write this book. Has this been something that you've always been passionate about and had in the back of your head, or did something happen recently that kind of caused you maybe being holed up in your house, for 12 months that was kind of the catalyst for writing this book? Just kind of talk to us about the motivation and also the impact and influence you want to have through your shift framework.
Absolutely. Yeah, it was ironically, it was one of those things. It's probably about 5 or 6 years ago. When I was journeying through a guy with one of the athletes that I was working with, a pro guy, who was forced to retire because of an injury. He was like planning on playing 4 or 5 more years and basically done. Had an injury in preseason, and that his career was over. And as we journeyed through that process, what I was realizing in that moment that my time is limited. And I'm like, if there was 5 other athletes like that, and I'm meeting it in once a week, sometimes twice a week with this athlete, if there was 5 other guys or 10. That's it. My schedule's packed. And it hit me in that moment. I'm like, if I want to reach and influence and impact positively more athletes in this space, specifically in this athlete transition to life after playing professionally, it can't just be me on my time. Like I have to be able to have something out there, something that's available. If it's the guy that's coming from a Division 3 or Division 1 school and he has to be, or it's someone that's playing in the G League or wherever it may be that I've never crossed paths with. I want to be able to have something out there that he can pick up, put into his hands, and navigate through and go through, and really begin to put the pieces in place to have a successful transition to life after playing. And that was really where it came from, was that recognition. If I can write a book or write content out there, the potential for impact exponentially increases. And so that's sort of that started the process. So I initially developed a course. So it's called, if you go to theshiftcourse.com, there's an online course there. I started there. Then I'm like, what's the next progression? And it was a book. So I just took the course and did a deep dive and really just really began to look at the nuts and bolts of this five-step framework of shift. It's looking at identity, understanding our story, really what drives us, our passion, what motivates us, and then beginning to think about the future and dreaming about what could be, as well as maximizing what, like you mentioned earlier, as far as some of the development you as a football coach, how that transitions to the corporate world. There's so many parallels there, but it's just a subtle shift in our perspective that needs to take place in order to recognize that. I don't know how many times I've heard, oh, I'm just an athlete, I only know my sport. And I'm like, well, actually, you're team focused, you're willing to sacrifice, you show courage in the midst of difficulty, you understand how to navigate conflict. I'm like, these are all skills that any corporation would love to have in an employee. I'm like, there's so much transferable skills in what you've cultivated as a professional athlete that transfer over. So let's maximize that. And then also understand how those skills then it can potentially influence whatever could be next. And then just some practical stuff. As pro athletes and as athletes in university level, a lot of your schedule is fixed. And so how do you create a healthy daily routine, which seems sort of silly, but if you're being told when to be somewhere at basically almost the entire day, having the discipline to actually do that. And then so recognizing some of those basic stuff, daily habits, daily routines, and then also beginning to finally is really tackling limiting beliefs. And we all have them. We basically things that we've bought into at some point in time that really limit what we could actually do and accomplish. And so beginning to recognize those and going through a process, a 6-step process that basically helps you identify what they are, how to work through them and replace those limiting beliefs with actually positive truths.
Wow.
So
Yeah.
yeah.
Incredibly important stuff. When does the book drop and where are we going to be able to find it?
Yeah. So it's this summer, 2021. Potentially, we're still working on the editor and the final like design and formatting and all the book fun stuff. We're looking end of June, maybe early July at the latest. If you go to shiftmystory.com, again, shiftmystory.com, you can get access to a little bit about the book, as well as I'm in the process of putting together a launch team just to help just get the word out there. So if you're more interested in about that, like we said, shiftmystory.com. And it's intentional. The website's intentional because it's about the stories of these athletes, about other people. And we want to be able to create a platform and a space for athletes to share their stories, to be able to get the word out, not only on the Shift platform, but also across other people's platforms. So as an athlete, how do you share your story? What does it look like in the transition? So being able to communicate and share that, and again, impact and have influence in the spaces that we all reach.
Yeah. And Jonathan, I'm really looking forward to seeing this. This is very important when we're talking about anybody making a transition, specifically athletes, because like you mentioned, the beliefs and the mindset is such a powerful piece. And I think that we're all susceptible to putting those limiting beliefs on ourselves and thinking, well, I achieved all these great things. Where do I really go from here? And understanding that there is so much out there and that you've already accomplished so much. And the exact same things that made you successful before are the same things that are going to make you successful moving forward. So I'm really excited to see the book and thank you so much for putting all this together. And really looking forward to the summer 2021 and checking it out.
Thank you very much. I really, really appreciate it.